We had to create 1v1 situations, and we had to have players that, one, could receive the ball with a player really tight to them, maybe sometimes even man marking, but more importantly, they had to turn and they had to beat somebody 1v1, and we worked really hard on that. The big thing I wanted to do when we came in, I wanted us to play a certain style of football, and that was playing out from the back, playing through the thirds, and we wanted to keep things really simple for that first 3 games of the tournament. We was all away for 8 days, but the 8 days consisted of 3.5 training sessions, so it was going to be very difficult to implement the style totally of what I wanted. So the first thing we did was we chose a system that we wanted to play, which was 4-3-3. And then the next thing was really not tactical. The next thing was about talking about we've got to be brave on the ball, we've got to be bold, we've got to be courageous, we've got to take the ball in every situation. So we wanted our back four to play really expansive. So, you know, we set our fullbacks, both fullbacks who like to get forward. But the key thing was for me is to get our centre backs really, really wide to create the width on the pitch. The 2 wide players would go high and wide. So we wanted to create a superiority in the middle of the pitch. But more importantly, we wanted to get our number 4 on the ball, particularly against a team we were playing France who played 4-4-2. So we knew that this middle section was going to be really important. So in playing 3 in there, what we did was we knew we was going to be matched up in there. So we asked our left-sided player, who was Tony Duggan at the time, to actually come in and play a little bit more narrow as well. So we'd have 4. We wanted to create a 4v2, 4v3 in the centre of the pitch, because I always think that if you create an overload in midfield and create superiority, then you're going to control the game of football. And I think for a team that was just beginning to show signs that they wanted to change the style, it was important to get the confidence and the belief in the team to actually have possession of the ball. So we worked really hard on the possession practices, but more importantly, to try and get the number 4 and the 2 centre backs to control the game. And we could only do that by creating superiority in the middle of the field. You need to be flexible in every game. You need to be flexible. You can't just say we're going to play 4-3-3 and this is going to be our stock system from now to the day that you leave the job. So we wanted to develop 2 systems, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. And what we said was in the first 6 months we were going to go with these systems and make sure that we get the principles right before we then start changing or tweaking those systems. I think what we have at the FA here is we have 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, but we have in possession and out of possession. So there's certain styles I wanted in possession. I wanted us to be expansive. I wanted us to create the overload in midfield. So depending on the opposition, if the opposition played a certain system, I felt that maybe this box of 4 would create the superiority. Then we would play a number 10 and somebody behind the number 9, and we'd create 2 holding midfield players that would help us create superiority in the middle. If we wanted to be a little bit more higher up the pitch, then we'd create the number 4 in there, and these 2 would play further to the number 9. And what I learned early on is that particularly in the women's game, we'd play against teams maybe that were 20 to probably 50 in the world that would play really deep, and we called it a low block. We would play literally everybody behind the ball playing this deep. And what we found was by playing 4-3-3 that the centre forward became really isolated, and particularly because they'd have probably 4 or 5 players around them. So we thought long and hard about it. I went away in the summer and thought long and hard about how you beat a low block team like this, and it was a low block really that I've never seen before. It was literally 11 players behind the ball, and you literally had a back 6, sometimes a back 7. You had your centre forward dropping into midfield, so there was no space for our 8, 10 and 9 to create any spaces and to create any movements. And I thought long and hard about how you get your creative players on the ball. And what we thought is that, you know, when we do our possession practices before these types of games, you'd go, you know, big areas and get the flow and rhythm. But actually, before you play a low block team, basically you was playing in a real tight area. You was playing in real tight areas, and what our players struggled early on is receiving the ball with 3 or 4 players around them in tight spaces, because they've probably never had to deal with that before. So we condensed our possession practices into real tight areas. So there was really, the touch had to be right, their awareness had to be right, the pace of pass, the side that they passed the ball in had to be absolutely perfect, and that really helped us. And then the second thing is that once we get to the final third, we had to work really hard on our final third play. And that was that we needed imagination. We needed players that could beat players one-on-one. You can have 6, 7 passes of the ball, but when you've got 11 players banked in, rigid like mannequins, it was very difficult to move them. We had to create 1v1 situations, and we had to have players that, one, could receive the ball with a player really tight to them, maybe sometimes even man marking, but more importantly, they had to turn and they had to beat somebody 1v1, and we worked really hard on that. And the last thing, and probably the most successful thing, is around about these areas here, is that we were refusing actually the ball and the passes in behind, that because all we could see is bodies in front of us, we would play a lot of balls side to side, side to side. You know as a player that's going to be very, very easy to defend. You're just shuffling from one side to the other. So what we said was we had to, in the final third, be a little bit braver in these little dink balls in behind. You see Man City doing it sometimes. You know, Bernardo Silva coming in here, just little chip balls in behind, which then what that does is you might not win the first one, but if they knock it down, you're going to win the second one. And what that meant is that you do that 2 or 3 times against a Bosnia or against a Wales, say for instance, away, is that next time they get the ball, they've already deepened off and the space is then to create. So the players had to be brave and use their imagination, because it was literally final third play. And when you're teaching and you're coaching, the final third play, I think, is always the most difficult to coach, because you want to create a freedom to express. You want to create that environment and culture where actually in the final third you can play a little bit free. Yes, you've got set movements, but you also want your players to be free to do what they feel is best. You know, wingers that want to play off the cuff, wingers that want to play with that ability to do what they need to do to beat a player. So we had to really drill into the players that the final third is the most important bit. The final third is when your touch, your awareness, and your ability and confidence and belief to beat a player has to be really good.